Staff Sergeant Elena Martinez pressed her eye to the rifle scope and watched the training target through the crosshairs. The wind was steady at 8 miles per hour from the northeast, temperature 72 degrees, humidity at 60%. She made the mental calculations automatically, adjusted for the environmental factors, and squeezed the trigger with the same smooth pressure she had practiced 10,000 times before. The bullet struck dead center of the target at 600 yards. Perfect shot. "Lucky shot," muttered Corporal Davis from the firing line next to her. He was one of the newest additions to Alpha Company, fresh from infantry school and full of opinions about what women could and couldn't do in combat roles. Elena ignored him and chambered another round. The second shot struck within half an inch of the first. The third shot created a tight grouping that any sniper would be proud of. She cleared her weapon and stood, slinging the rifle across her shoulder with practiced ease. "3 lucky shots," Davis said louder this time, making sure the other soldiers on the range could hear him. "But real combat isn't about shooting paper targets on a calm day." Several of the men chuckled, and Elena felt the familiar weight of their skepticism settling around her like morning fog. It had been this way for the 3 years since she had transferred to the infantry from her previous role as a military police officer. No matter how well she performed, no matter how many qualifications she earned or records she broke, there were always those who believed she didn't belong. Captain Rodriguez approached the firing line, reviewing the scores on his tablet. Elena's results showed 3 perfect shots in conditions that had challenged even the most experienced marksman in the company. He nodded approvingly as he reviewed her data. "Outstanding shooting, Martinez," he said. "Your scores are consistently in the top 5% of the battalion." "Thank you, sir," Elena replied, maintaining the professional demeanor that had served her well throughout her 8-year military career. Captain Rodriguez looked at the group of soldiers gathered around the firing positions. "I want everyone to understand something," he said, his voice carrying the authority of 15 years in the Army. "Staff Sergeant Martinez has earned her position through merit, training, and performance. She has completed the same schools, met the same standards, and exceeded the same requirements as every other soldier in this company." Davis shifted uncomfortably, but didn't respond directly to his commanding officer. Instead, he and several others exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their continued doubts. Elena had grown accustomed to this routine. Prove herself again and again, only to face the same questions and skepticism the next day. Her file contained commendations for marksmanship, leadership, and tactical excellence. She had graduated at the top of her class from the Army Sniper School, completed advanced urban warfare training, and earned expert ratings on every weapon system in the company's inventory. Yet here she stood, listening to whispered conversations about whether she could handle real combat. The truth was that Elena had already seen real combat. During her deployment to Afghanistan as an MP, she had engaged enemy forces on 14 separate occasions. She had received the Bronze Star for heroism after single-handedly defending a supply convoy when it came under attack by insurgents. But military police work didn't carry the same mystique as infantry operations in the minds of some soldiers. After the range training concluded, Elena returned to her quarters to clean her rifle and prepare for the next day's exercises. Her room was Spartanly furnished but meticulously organized. Her gear was arranged with military precision, every item in its designated place. She had learned long ago that attention to detail and absolute preparation were the foundations of success in any military operation. As she disassembled her rifle for cleaning, Elena reflected on the conversation she had overheard earlier that week in the mess hall. Several soldiers from other platoons were discussing the upcoming joint training exercise with international forces. The exercise would involve complex scenarios designed to test each unit's capabilities under realistic combat conditions. "I heard they're going to assign roles based on performance evaluations," one soldier had said. "The best performers get the critical positions." "Yeah, well, let's hope they don't put any diversity hires in key spots," another had responded, glancing meaningfully in Elena's direction. "Some positions are too important to waste on social experiments." The comment had stung because Elena knew exactly what he meant. Despite her proven record, her achievements were often dismissed as products of lowered standards or political correctness rather than genuine competence. The suggestion that her presence in the unit was somehow a liability rather than an asset revealed the depth of prejudice she faced. Elena finished cleaning her rifle and turned her attention to studying tactical manuals. She had always believed that knowledge and preparation were her best weapons against doubt and discrimination. If she had to work twice as hard to receive half the recognition, then that's what she would do. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her younger brother Miguel, who was studying engineering at college back home in Texas. "Saw your company mentioned in the Army Times," he wrote. "Sounds like you guys are doing some serious training. Stay safe. Hermana." Elena smiled as she typed back. "Always do. How are your studies going?" "Good, but I still think you're crazier than I am for joining the infantry. Mom is convinced you're trying to prove something." Their mother had never quite understood Elena's decision to transfer from military police to infantry, then volunteer for sniper training and seek assignment to a frontline combat unit. Maria Martinez worried constantly about her daughter's safety and often wondered aloud why Elena couldn't be satisfied with a safer military role. Elena understood her mother's concerns, but she also knew that she had found her calling in the infantry. The precision required for long-range shooting appealed to her analytical mind, while the tactical challenges of infantry operations satisfied her desire to make a meaningful contribution to her unit's mission. "Not trying to prove anything," Elena texted back. "Just doing my job." But even as she typed those words, Elena knew they weren't entirely true. Part of her was driven by a desire to prove that women could excel in any military role, that physical strength wasn't the only measure of combat effectiveness, and that diversity could actually enhance, rather than diminish, unit capabilities. The next morning brought news that would put those beliefs to the test. Captain Rodriguez called a company meeting to announce that Alpha Company had been selected for a special assignment. Intelligence reports indicated increased activity by hostile forces along a remote border region, and their unit was being deployed to establish a forward observation post. "This isn't a training exercise," the captain emphasized. "We'll be operating in an area where contact with enemy forces is not just possible but likely. Every soldier in this company needs to be prepared for real combat operations." Elena felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied the prospect of actual deployment. This was what she had trained for, what she had prepared for during countless hours of practice and study. Finally, an opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities in the environment that mattered most. But she also noticed the looks exchanged between several of her fellow soldiers. Some appeared concerned about having a woman in their unit during actual combat operations. Others seemed skeptical that she would perform as well under fire as she did on the training range. Sergeant First Class Thompson, the company's senior non-commissioned officer, outlined the mission parameters. They would establish an observation post overlooking a valley known to be used as a transit route by enemy forces. The position would be isolated, with limited options for reinforcement or evacuation if things went wrong. "We'll be operating with a small team," Thompson explained. "Every person needs to be capable of multiple roles. We need soldiers who can shoot, communicate, navigate, and make critical decisions under pressure." Elena raised her hand. "Sergeant, what are the specific requirements for team selection?" Thompson consulted his notes. "Marksmanship scores in the top 10%. Demonstrated proficiency with communications equipment, navigation certification, and medical training certification. Physical fitness scores in the excellent category." Elena had all those qualifications and more. Her marksmanship scores placed her in the top 5% of the battalion. She held advanced certifications in tactical communications. Her navigation skills had been honed through years of training, and she was certified as a combat medic. Her physical fitness scores consistently rated in the superior category. After the briefing, Elena approached Sergeant Thompson privately. "I'd like to volunteer for the observation team, Sergeant." Thompson looked at her thoughtfully. He was a 20-year veteran who had served in multiple combat zones and had seen soldiers of every background succeed or fail based on their individual capabilities rather than their demographics. "I appreciate the volunteer spirit, Martinez," he said. "Your qualifications are certainly solid, but I need to be straight with you about something." Elena braced herself for another conversation about the challenges women faced in combat roles. "Some of the guys are nervous about having a female soldier on a small team in an isolated position," Thompson continued. "Not because they doubt your technical skills, but because they're concerned about unit cohesion under stress." "With respect, Sergeant, unit cohesion depends on trust, training, and mutual respect," Elena replied. "I've been training alongside these soldiers for over a year. My performance has been consistent and reliable." Thompson nodded. "I agree with you, Martinez, but perception sometimes matters as much as reality in military operations. If other team members are distracted by concerns about your presence, that could affect overall mission effectiveness." Elena felt frustration building but kept her voice steady. "Sergeant, the only way to change those perceptions is to demonstrate capability in real situations. I can't prove myself if I'm never given the opportunity." "That's a fair point," Thompson admitted. "Tell you what, I'll include you in the selection process. If your scores and evaluations support it, you'll be considered for the team on merit alone." Elena thanked him and returned to her quarters to begin intensive preparation. She knew this might be her only chance to prove that her training and skills translated effectively to real combat operations. The observation mission would be demanding, dangerous, and highly visible within the battalion. Success would validate everything she had worked for, while failure would likely reinforce every negative stereotype about women in combat roles. Over the next week, Elena threw herself into preparation with an intensity that impressed even her harshest critics. She spent extra hours on the rifle range, improving her already exceptional marksmanship scores. She studied topographical maps of the deployment area until she could navigate the terrain blindfolded. She reviewed communications protocols and practiced medical procedures until they became second nature. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed by Captain Rodriguez, who observed her during one of the extended training sessions. "Martinez, you're putting in a lot of extra effort," he commented. "Your baseline performance is already well above standard." "I want to be ready for whatever the mission requires, sir," Elena replied. "Excellence is the minimum standard I set for myself." Rodriguez smiled. "That's the attitude I like to see. But don't burn yourself out before we even deploy. Rest and recovery are just as important as training." Elena appreciated the advice, but couldn't bring herself to ease up on her preparation. She knew that she would be held to a higher standard than her male counterparts, and she was determined to exceed even those elevated expectations. The selection process involved written examinations, practical exercises, and psychological evaluations. Elena scored in the top 3% on the written tests, demonstrating comprehensive knowledge of tactics, communications, and medical procedures. Her practical exercises showed exceptional competence with all required equipment and procedures. The psychological evaluation was the most challenging part of the process. The evaluating officer, Major Stevens, asked probing questions about her motivations, stress responses, and ability to function effectively in small group dynamics. "Why is this assignment important to you, Staff Sergeant Martinez?" Major Stevens asked during their session. Elena considered her answer carefully. Sir, I believe my skills and training can contribute meaningfully to mission success. I want to serve where I can make the greatest positive impact. Some people might say you're trying to prove a point about women in combat, the Major observed. How do you respond to that? Sir, I'm not interested in proving points, Elena replied. I'm interested in accomplishing missions and protecting fellow soldiers. If my success happens to demonstrate something about the capabilities of women in combat, that's a secondary benefit, not a primary motivation. Major Stevens made notes in her file and asked several more questions about her responses to stress, her leadership style, and her ability to make critical decisions under pressure. Elena answered each question honestly and directly, drawing on her previous combat experience and training scenarios. 3 days later, Sergeant Thompson announced the composition of the observation team. Elena's name was on the list. She would be part of a 6-person team responsible for establishing and maintaining the forward observation post. Her primary role would be designated marksman and secondary communications operator. The team leader would be Staff Sergeant Wilson, a respected soldier with extensive combat experience. Elena felt a mixture of pride and apprehension as she reviewed the mission briefing. This was the opportunity she had worked toward for years, but she also understood the weight of responsibility that came with it. Not only did she need to perform her duties effectively, but she needed to do so in a way that proved the value of her presence on the team. The mission would test every skill she had developed, every piece of knowledge she had acquired, and every aspect of her character that had been forged through years of training and preparation. Success would open doors for other women seeking similar opportunities, while failure would likely close them for years to come. As Elena packed her gear for the deployment, she thought about all the people who had supported her journey and all those who had doubted her capabilities. Both groups had contributed to her development as a soldier, though in different ways. The supporters had given her confidence and encouragement, while the doubters had motivated her to achieve levels of excellence that might otherwise have been unnecessary. Now, with just 48 hours remaining before deployment, Elena focused on the mission ahead. She had prepared as thoroughly as possible, trained to the highest standards, and earned her place on the team through documented performance. Whatever challenges awaited at the observation post, she was as ready as any soldier could be. The real test was about to begin. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris, its rotors beating against the thin mountain air. Elena Martinez grabbed her pack and rifle case, then followed her 5 teammates out of the aircraft. The observation post location was exactly as described in the briefings, a rocky outcropping that provided excellent visibility over the valley below while offering natural concealment from detection. Staff Sergeant Wilson, the team leader, immediately began directing the establishment of their position. Rodriguez, set up communications. Thompson, establish perimeter security. Martinez, I want you to identify the best shooting positions and prepare range cards for the entire valley. Elena acknowledged the order and began surveying the terrain with professional efficiency. The valley stretched for nearly 3 miles from north to south, with the main transit route running along the eastern side, where it followed a seasonal riverbed. Multiple secondary paths branched off from the main route, creating a complex network that would require careful observation to monitor effectively. She identified 3 primary shooting positions that would provide overlapping fields of fire across the valley. The main position offered the longest sight lines, but would require careful camouflage to avoid detection. The secondary positions provided closer range coverage, but had more limited visibility. Elena began preparing detailed range cards for each position, marking distances, wind factors, and potential target areas. The team worked through the afternoon to establish their observation post according to operational protocols. Communications specialist Rodriguez set up the satellite communication equipment that would connect them to headquarters, while Medic Thompson prepared a casualty collection point and inventoried medical supplies. The other two team members, Corporals Davis and Johnson, worked on camouflaging their position and establishing concealed observation points. Elena noticed that Davis was the same soldier who had dismissed her marksmanship as lucky shots during range training. His attitude toward her presence on the team remained skeptical, though he kept his comments professional in front of Staff Sergeant Wilson. As evening approached, Wilson called the team together for a mission briefing. Intelligence reports suggest we can expect enemy activity along the transit routes within the next 48 to 72 hours, he announced. Our mission is to observe and report, but we need to be prepared for the possibility of contact. Elena studied the tactical map as Wilson outlined their operational procedures. Martinez, you'll have primary responsibility for long-range observation and engagement if necessary. Your shooting position provides coverage of the main route and most of the secondary paths. Understood, Sergeant, Elena replied. I've prepared range cards for distances from 400 to 1,200 meters. Wind conditions are variable but manageable. Wilson nodded approvingly. Good work. Rodriguez will maintain communications. Thompson handles medical and logistics. Davis and Johnson will rotate on close security and secondary observation. Everyone clear on their responsibilities? The team acknowledged their assignments and began settling into their operational routine. Elena spent the first hours of darkness adjusting her primary shooting position, using night vision equipment to confirm her range calculations and identify potential target areas. The work was methodical and precise, requiring the kind of attention to detail that had become second nature during her years of training. Around midnight, Rodriguez received their first significant intelligence update from headquarters. Sergeant Wilson, he called quietly. We're getting reports of increased vehicle movement approximately 15 kilometers to the north. Estimated time to our area is 4 to 6 hours if they're heading this way. Wilson gathered the team for a quick briefing. Looks like we might see some activity sooner than expected, he said. Everyone needs to be ready to execute our observation protocols. Remember, our primary mission is intelligence gathering, not engagement, unless we're directly threatened. Elena felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with the prospect of real operations. This was the moment she had prepared for, trained for, and worked toward throughout her military career. All the doubts and skepticism from others would either be validated or disproven based on her performance in the next few hours. She returned to her shooting position and began final preparations. Her rifle was already zeroed and cleaned, her ammunition was arranged for quick access, and her range cards were secured where she could reference them quickly, even in darkness. Elena had learned to trust her preparation and training rather than rely on luck or improvisation. Dawn broke slowly over the valley, revealing a landscape that looked peaceful and empty to the casual observer. But Elena's trained eye immediately began picking up subtle signs of activity. Dust clouds in the distance suggested vehicle movement, while the absence of local wildlife indicated that something was disturbing the normal patterns of the area. Wilson, this is Martinez, she spoke into her radio headset. I'm seeing indicators of possible movement approximately 8 kilometers north of our position. No visual confirmation yet, but environmental signs suggest vehicles approaching. Copy that, Martinez. Continue observation and report any positive identification. Elena adjusted her scope and settled into the patient rhythm of surveillance that distinguished professional snipers from amateur shooters. She could remain motionless for hours if necessary, scanning the valley systematically while maintaining situational awareness of her immediate surroundings. At 800 hours, she spotted the first enemy vehicle. Wilson, I have visual confirmation of hostile forces, Elena reported calmly. Lead vehicle is a technical mounted with heavy machine gun, approximately 6 kilometers north and closing on the main route. Counting multiple additional vehicles following. Staff Sergeant Wilson immediately alerted headquarters while Elena continued her count. I'm seeing 12 vehicles total, she reported. Mix of technicals and transport trucks. Estimated personnel strength between 60 and 80 individuals based on vehicle capacity. The convoy was moving at moderate speed along the main transit route, exactly as intelligence had predicted. Elena tracked their progress through her scope, noting their formation, equipment, and apparent destination. The lead vehicles were clearly combat-oriented, while the trailing trucks appeared to be carrying supplies or additional personnel. "Martinez, can you identify any high-value targets?" Wilson asked over the radio. Elena studied the convoy more carefully, looking for command vehicles or individuals who might represent leadership targets. "Negative on confirmed high-value targets at this distance," she replied. "But the second vehicle appears to be a command variant based on additional antenna arrays." Rodriguez was busy relaying their observations to headquarters while Thompson and the other team members maintained security around their position. The observation post was functioning exactly as designed, with each team member contributing their specialized skills to the overall mission. At 0830 hours, the situation changed dramatically. "All stations, this is Overwatch," came the urgent transmission from headquarters. "Be advised, we have reports of a second enemy formation moving from the south toward your position. Estimate 40 to 50 additional hostiles approaching your location from the rear." Elena felt her stomach drop as she realized the implications. They were being flanked by a larger force than originally anticipated, and their observation post was about to become a contested position rather than a concealed surveillance site. Wilson immediately began issuing orders. "Rodriguez, request immediate extraction. Thompson, prepare defensive positions. Davis and Johnson, establish rear security. Martinez, maintain observation of the primary convoy while we sort this out." Elena adjusted her position to provide coverage of both the approaching northern convoy and potential threats from the south. The tactical situation was developing rapidly, and their small team was potentially facing odds of 20 to 1 or worse. "Martinez, this is Wilson. I need you to identify any immediate threats to our position from either direction." Elena scanned both approaches through her scope, her training taking over as the adrenaline sharpened her focus. "Northern convoy is approximately 2 kilometers out and still approaching. I don't have visual on the southern force yet, but if intelligence estimates are correct, we could be surrounded within 30 minutes. The radio crackled with transmissions between their team and headquarters. "Overwatch, this is Alpha 1-6, Wilson was saying. "Request immediate air support and extraction assets. Our position is about to be compromised by superior numbers." "Alpha 1-6, extraction assets are not immediately available. Air support is 40 minutes out. You are authorized to withdraw to alternate position if necessary." Elena realized that their carefully planned observation mission was rapidly becoming a survival situation. The team would need to either successfully hide from the approaching forces or fight their way out against overwhelming odds. "Sergeant Wilson," Elena called over the radio, "I recommend we maintain position and use our advantages. We have superior elevation, prepared fields of fire, and the enemy doesn't know our exact location yet. Moving now might expose us to both forces simultaneously." Wilson considered her recommendation while monitoring radio traffic from headquarters. "What's your assessment of our defensive capabilities, Martinez?" Elena had been thinking through exactly that question. "Sir, if we can channel the approaching forces into our prepared kill zones, we can multiply the effectiveness of our fires. The terrain naturally funnels movement patterns, and we have excellent observation of all approaches." Davis spoke up on the team frequency. "Sergeant, with respect, 6 people against 100+ hostiles isn't a fight we can win. We should be looking for withdrawal routes." Elena understood his concern, but she also recognized that their current position offered significant tactical advantages that would be lost if they tried to move. "Davis, our concealment is our biggest asset right now," she responded. "If we start moving, we become visible to both enemy forces. Better to use the terrain and our preparation to our advantage." Wilson made his decision. We hold position and prepare for defensive operations. Martinez, I need you to identify priority targets that would disrupt enemy formations if engaged. Rodriguez, continue coordinating with headquarters and call for any available support. Everyone else, prepare for close quarters defense. Elena began identifying the most critical targets among the approaching convoy. The lead vehicles represented immediate threats, while the command vehicle could disrupt enemy coordination if neutralized. She also noted several technical vehicles mounted with heavy weapons that could pose significant dangers to their position if allowed to get into effective range. Wilson, I've identified 12 priority targets among the northern convoy, she reported. If I can engage the lead vehicles and the command variant, it should cause confusion and delay their advance. What about ammunition conservation? Wilson asked, raising a critical concern. Elena had been tracking her ammunition carefully throughout their deployment. I have 60 rounds of match-grade ammunition and another 40 rounds of standard ball. If I'm selective about target engagement, that should provide adequate firepower for our defensive needs. The northern convoy was now within 800 meters of their position and beginning to slow as they approached a natural choke point in the valley. Elena realized this might be her best opportunity to demonstrate the capabilities that had earned her a place on this team. Wilson, request permission to engage priority targets, she said calmly. Staff Sergeant Wilson looked through his binoculars at the approaching convoy, then at the tactical situation developing around their position. The Southern force was now visible in the distance, and it was clear that their small team was about to face the most serious combat situation any of them had ever encountered. Martinez, Wilson said after a moment of consideration, you are authorized to engage priority targets at your discretion. Make every shot count. Elena settled into her shooting position and focused her scope on the lead vehicle of the approaching convoy. The driver was clearly visible at 750 meters, well within her effective range under current conditions. She made final adjustments for wind and elevation, controlled her breathing, and prepared to prove that her years of training and preparation had been worth every doubt and challenge she had faced. The moment that would define her career as a soldier was about to begin. Elena Martinez took a deep breath and squeezed the trigger. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder as the bullet traveled 750 meters in less than a second. Through her scope, she watched the driver of the lead vehicle slump forward, causing the technical to veer off the road and crash into a boulder. The convoy immediately stopped, and Elena could see personnel dismounting from vehicles in confusion. She had achieved tactical surprise, but now she needed to maintain pressure to prevent the enemy from organizing an effective response. She shifted her aim to the second vehicle and fired again. The shot struck the gunner behind the mounted machine gun, neutralizing the immediate threat to their observation post. Elena chambered another round and engaged the driver of the command vehicle, watching as it too ground to a halt. Martinez, excellent shooting, Staff Sergeant Wilson reported over the radio. Continue engaging priority targets. Elena had practiced this type of rapid target engagement countless times during training, but executing it under actual combat conditions required a level of mental discipline that only came from complete confidence in her abilities. She methodically worked her way through the convoy, targeting drivers, gunners, and anyone who appeared to be taking command of the chaotic situation. By her seventh shot, the northern convoy was in complete disarray. Vehicles were stopped at random angles across the road, personnel were seeking cover behind whatever protection they could find, and no one seemed to know where the accurate fire was coming from. Southern force is now visible, reported Corporal Davis from his observation position. Looks like they heard the shooting and they're accelerating their approach. Elena glanced toward the south through her scope and saw dust clouds indicating rapid vehicle movement. The enemy was responding to the engagement by pressing their attack from both directions simultaneously. Her team was about to face the full weight of both enemy forces converging on their position. Rodriguez, what's our status on air support? Wilson asked. "Still 25 minutes out, Sergeant," came the reply. "Headquarters is aware of our situation, but extraction assets remain unavailable." Elena realized that her marksmanship skills would need to buy time for the entire team. If she could continue disrupting enemy movements and preventing them from organizing coordinated attacks, they might survive until air support arrived. She returned her attention to the northern convoy and noticed that several enemy personnel were attempting to establish positions that would allow them to provide covering fire for an advance on the observation post. Elena engaged these targets methodically, using her superior position and training to deny them any opportunity to establish effective firing positions. "Martinez, the Southern force just came into view," Wilson reported. "I count approximately 15 vehicles with what looks like 60 to 70 personnel." Elena adjusted her scope and acquired the Southern convoy at a range of approximately 1 kilometer. They were moving faster than the northern group and appeared more organized in their approach. She identified the lead vehicle and prepared to engage. Her shot struck the windshield of the lead technical, causing it to swerve violently and roll over. The vehicles behind it were forced to stop to avoid collision, creating immediate tactical confusion among the Southern force as well. Elena quickly shifted between targets, engaging drivers and gunners among both enemy formations. Her training had emphasized the importance of maintaining initiative in defensive operations, and she was demonstrating exactly how a skilled marksman could multiply the effectiveness of a small defensive force. "Contact rear!" shouted Corporal Johnson from his security position. "We have dismounted infantry approaching from the east." Elena realized that the enemy was adapting to her long-range fires by deploying personnel on foot to approach the observation post from directions that were harder for her to cover. The tactical situation was becoming more complex as the enemy began to understand their defensive capabilities and adjust their tactics accordingly. "Wilson, I need to shift positions to engage the dismounted threat," Elena reported. "Negative, Martinez. Stay on the long-range targets. Thompson and I will handle the close-range defense." Elena understood the logic of Wilson's decision, but she could see through her scope that the dismounted enemy forces were moving more aggressively now that they had identified the source of the accurate long-range fire. Her position was becoming untenable as more enemy personnel began flanking movements designed to neutralize her. She engaged an enemy soldier who was attempting to establish a firing position approximately 400 meters from their location, then quickly shifted to another target who was carrying what appeared to be a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. The RPG represented a serious threat to their defensive position, and Elena prioritized its elimination. The shot struck the RPG gunner center mass, but Elena noticed that another enemy soldier immediately moved to recover the weapon. She engaged the second soldier as well, then scanned for additional RPG threats among the enemy formations. "Martinez, I'm counting approximately 40 enemy personnel advancing on foot from multiple directions," Wilson reported. "How are you holding up on ammunition?" Elena performed a quick mental count. She had fired 23 rounds and had 77 remaining. At her current rate of engagement, she would need to begin prioritizing targets more carefully to ensure she didn't run out of ammunition before air support arrived. "I'm managing ammunition carefully, Sergeant," she replied, focusing on the highest priority threats. The next 15 minutes tested every aspect of Elena's training and mental discipline. Enemy forces were now approaching from 4 different directions simultaneously, requiring her to constantly shift between targets while maintaining the accuracy that was keeping her team alive. She watched through her scope as enemy personnel attempted to establish mortar positions approximately 800 meters from the observation post. Elena engaged the mortar crew with precision shots that disrupted their setup and forced them to seek new positions. Every few seconds, she would shift to engage threats from other directions, then return to monitor the mortar teams. "Thompson, I need you to take over communications," Wilson ordered. "Rodriguez is hit." Elena glanced toward the communications position and saw their radio operator receiving medical attention from Thompson. The enemy was beginning to place effective fire on their position, making their defensive situation increasingly precarious. "Martinez, can you identify the enemy command elements?" Wilson asked. "If we can disrupt their leadership, it might buy us more time." Elena studied the enemy formations through her scope, looking for personnel who appeared to be directing the attacks or coordinating movements between different groups. She identified a cluster of individuals near the southern convoy who seemed to be making tactical decisions and gesturing toward different approach routes. "I have possible command element at the southern rally point," she reported. "Range approximately 900 meters. Take the shot if you have confidence in it." Elena adjusted her scope for the longer range and more challenging wind conditions. The targets were partially concealed behind vehicle cover, requiring her to wait for clear shot opportunities. She controlled her breathing and waited for one of the apparent leaders to expose himself fully. The shot was one of the most difficult she had ever attempted under combat conditions. The target was at the extreme range of effective accuracy, wind conditions were variable, and she was shooting from a position that had been under intermittent enemy fire for the past 30 minutes. Elena applied all her training and experience to the shot calculation, then squeezed the trigger with the same smooth pressure she had practiced thousands of times. Through her scope, she watched the target fall. Almost immediately, the coordination among the southern enemy forces began to deteriorate as personnel gathered around the fallen leader and appeared uncertain about how to proceed with their attack. "Outstanding shot, Martinez," Wilson observed. "That definitely disrupted their organization." Elena continued engaging targets of opportunity while monitoring the overall tactical situation. The enemy still outnumbered her team by more than 30-1, but her precise fires were preventing them from massing for decisive attacks. Every shot needed to contribute to their survival, and Elena was making every shot count. "Air support inbound, 2 minutes," Thompson announced from the communications position. Elena felt a surge of relief, but she also realized that the next 2 minutes would be the most critical of the entire engagement. The enemy forces would likely attempt a final coordinated assault before air support arrived, meaning she would need to maintain maximum fire effectiveness during the most dangerous phase of the battle. She identified a group of enemy personnel who appeared to be preparing for such an assault and engaged them systematically. Her shots were now coming at 2 to 3 second intervals as she moved between targets, maintaining the rapid but precise fire that had characterized her performance throughout the engagement. "Martinez, enemy personnel with explosive charges moving toward our position from the north," Davis reported. "Range approximately 200 meters. Elena shifted her scope to the closer range and identified the threat. 3 enemy soldiers were carrying what appeared to be improvised explosive devices and attempting to approach close enough to use them against the observation post. She engaged all 3 in rapid succession, neutralizing the explosive threat with 3 carefully placed shots. The sound of approaching aircraft became audible over the noise of small arms fire, and Elena could see the enemy forces beginning to recognize that their tactical situation was about to change dramatically. Some personnel were already moving toward their vehicles in apparent preparation for withdrawal. Elena continued engaging targets until the first aircraft began its attack run on the enemy formations. The precision fires from the air, combined with her ground-based marksmanship, finally broke the enemy's will to continue the assault. She watched through her scope as personnel began abandoning their positions and retreating toward their vehicles. "Cease fire, Martinez," Wilson ordered, as the air support continued its attacks on the withdrawing enemy forces. "Outstanding performance under fire." Elena safed her rifle and took her first opportunity in nearly an hour to fully assess their tactical situation. The observation post remained under friendly control. All team members were alive, and the enemy forces were in full retreat under pressure from continuing air attacks. She performed a mental count of her ammunition expenditure during the engagement. 47 rounds fired, with accuracy that had disrupted 2 enemy formations totaling more than 150 personnel, prevented multiple coordinated attacks, and bought critical time for air support to arrive. Staff Sergeant Wilson approached her position as the immediate tactical situation stabilized. "Martinez, I need you to know that your performance today was exceptional by any standard," he said. "You single-handedly prevented this position from being overrun." Elena felt exhaustion beginning to set in as the adrenaline subsided, but she also felt a deep satisfaction that came from knowing she had performed her duties to the highest possible standard. The doubts and skepticism she had faced during training seemed irrelevant now compared to the reality of what she had accomplished under the most demanding conditions. "Thank you, Sergeant," she replied. "The team preparation and coordination made the difference." Wilson shook his head. "The team did their jobs, but your marksmanship was what kept us alive. I've never seen shooting like that under combat conditions." Over the next hour, as evacuation helicopters arrived and the team prepared to return to base, Elena reflected on the engagement that had just concluded. She had fired 47 precisely placed shots that had neutralized or disrupted enemy personnel at ranges from 200 to 900 meters, under conditions that included variable wind, enemy return fire, and extreme time pressure. The radio crackled with congratulations from headquarters as reports of the engagement were transmitted up the chain of command. "Alpha 1-6, this is Overwatch. Preliminary assessment indicates your team successfully defended against enemy forces, estimated at 190 to 210 personnel. Request detailed debrief upon return to base." Elena realized that the numbers being reported meant she had indeed stopped approximately 200 opponents through her individual marksmanship performance. The thought was sobering rather than exciting, as she understood the responsibility that came with such capabilities. During the helicopter flight back to base, Corporal Davis approached her with an expression that was very different from the skepticism he had shown during training. "Martinez," he said, speaking loudly enough to be heard over the aircraft noise, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong about your combat capabilities, and my attitude was unprofessional. You saved all our lives today." Elena appreciated the gesture, but she was more interested in focusing on the lessons learned from the mission than dwelling on past conflicts. "We all did our jobs, Davis. That's what professional soldiers do." Thompson nodded in agreement. "Martinez is right, but she's being modest. I've been in a lot of firefights, and I've never seen marksmanship like that under pressure. 47 shots, 47 hits at ranges that most people couldn't manage on a training range with unlimited time." Wilson looked at Elena with obvious respect. "Martinez, when we get back to base, there are going to be a lot of people who want to debrief this engagement. Your performance is going to be studied and analyzed by people throughout the command structure." Elena understood that the mission had implications beyond their individual team success. Her performance under combat conditions would likely influence policies and attitudes about women in infantry roles, sniper positions, and small unit operations. "Sergeant, I hope the focus stays on mission accomplishment and team performance rather than individual recognition," she said. "This was a successful defensive operation because everyone contributed their specialized skills effectively." Wilson smiled. "That's exactly the right attitude, Martinez, but you also need to understand that what you accomplished today was extraordinary by any measure. You proved that skill, training, and mental discipline are more important than any preconceptions about who can or cannot excel in combat roles." As the helicopter approached their base, Elena could see personnel gathering on the landing zone. Word of their engagement had apparently spread throughout the battalion, and there was clearly significant interest in debriefing the mission that had resulted in such decisive defensive success against overwhelming odds. Elena checked her rifle one final time, ensuring it was properly secured for landing. The weapon that had served her so well during the engagement was the same rifle she had been carrying during training when Corporal Davis had dismissed her shots as lucky. She wondered what he thought about luck versus skill now that he had seen her perform under conditions where luck would not have been sufficient. The helicopter touched down, and Elena gathered her equipment for the walk to the debriefing facility. She had proven everything she had worked to prove throughout her military career, but she also understood that this was just one mission in what would hopefully be a long and productive service to her country. As she walked across the landing zone, Elena thought about all the female soldiers who would come after her in infantry and sniper roles. Her performance today had opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed, but it had also established expectations that future women in similar positions would need to meet or exceed. The responsibility was significant, but Elena was confident that women who chose military careers based on genuine calling rather than point-making would prove themselves just as effectively as she had. Skill, dedication, and professionalism were not gender-specific qualities, and combat effectiveness was determined by training, preparation, and mental discipline rather than physical characteristics or social expectations. Elena Martinez had stopped 200 enemy personnel with precision rifle fire, but more importantly, she had demonstrated that excellence in military operations was a matter of individual capability rather than demographic category. The doubts and skepticism she had faced were now replaced by professional respect earned through demonstrated competence under the most demanding conditions possible. The mission was complete, but her service would continue.